The Lamb was slain, and his blood was poured out. Put on the frame for those in the house, now safe inside. As the angel passed them by, like them I cried. Cover me with the blood of your forgiveness, from the river of your holiness that flows with love. Cover me, the accuser standing o'er me is powerless before thee, for this my plea. Cover me, here on my knees, I reflect on the day, my thoughts, my deeds, the standard.
Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited we're able to dig into the study again of the book of Matthew. Tonight we are in Matthew chapter 14, so if you want to open up your Bibles, we'll get started there in just a second. But by way of introduction again, my name is Cliff Sabro, preacher at the West Visalia Church of Christ, along with Nick Westberg, our associate minister, and Curtis Pittman, who is one of our deacons who coordinates our youth group, which, although we're in quarantine right now, we're doing more with the youth. I know we were at your house on Sunday night having Bible study and enjoying some time of fellowship. So although we're still distant in a lot of ways, we're back to normal in some regards. We had people here on Sunday. It was a little bit warm at our 8 a.m. service, especially, outside with masks on and everything. It seemed kind of stuffy, but we made it through. And we also had our 10:45 a.m. service. But let me remind everybody before we get into the text too, although we're studying this right now on Sunday night, you're more than welcome to gather with us on Wednesday at 7 o'clock for our Zoom class, where we as a group talk about what we're talking about right now. But for the last several months, we've been in the book of Matthew and trying to understand the overall theme of the book, which is proving that Jesus is the Messiah. We are in the middle of Jesus' ministry, and we just finished up the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. But Nick or Curtis, any of you guys want to set the stage for where we are right now? Maybe some things we need to remember as we get into verse 22?
I think it's kind of neat that we're at the halfway point with Matthew. It's kind of downhill from here, if you will.
Yeah.
But to answer the question you actually asked, looking back, we're in Matthew chapter 14, and we just saw this contrast between Jesus and Herod. And what we really need to, I think, look at from Herod's standpoint, or what Matthew's including about Herod, is how we react when we're approached with sin.
Very good question. How do we react when we are confronted in our sin? That's a good question to ask. Keep going.
No, and then it's just the way that Herod leads is contrasted with the way that Jesus leads.
Mm-hmm.
Because following the death of John the Baptist, Jesus was obviously hurt.
Mm-hmm.
He emotionally wanted to go off to a secluded place, but he took care of the crowds. And so he saw and had compassion on the crowds, and he served them as opposed to being served as Herod was.
I love that. So he sacrificed even in a time of crisis in his own life. Our wives today were engaged in a Bible study, and I got to see some of the notes that Zinnia was going over before the study a little bit, and we were discussing what they were talking about. And one of the questions they had was something to do with, in times of fear and lowliness, how does that cause us to view our circumstances? Mm-hmm. And here you have a situation where Jesus is in a time of distress. His good friend, his relative John, has died. And instead of viewing that as an excuse to back away from what really matters, he still buckles down and serves other people. And I think that's awesome. Nick, what else do we need to remind ourselves of before we get into verse 22?
Well, that underlying question, why are the religious leaders rejecting Jesus?
Yeah.
As a Jew reading this from a first century perspective, my thoughts would be, how come they're rejecting Jesus? If he's supposed to be this great Messiah, this one who's supposed to free us out of Roman captivity, why are these religious leaders rejecting him? And ultimately we find out that they had bad hearts, so they were producing bad fruit.
Which is why we reject him today.
Which is why we reject him today. And Jesus really proves to us why and how he is that leader within the last half of the chapter. So he's done that all along, but this really shows us in contrast to the religious leaders of that day, as well as
so we have a contrast, like as you mentioned, between Jesus and Herod, and we have a contrast of the true disciples and the Pharisees, and definitely a lot of contrast, and it forces us to beg the question of which one would we be in a lot of these situations. Well, we're going to pick up in verse 22 of Matthew chapter 14. And this is a familiar scene. I mean, of the occasions in Jesus' life where he interacted with his disciple, this is one of the big ones. If you were to survey someone who just has kind of a surface understanding of Jesus, tell me something Jesus did, they go, well, he walked on water. They'd probably bring up maybe this story right here. So let's look at this and break it down, though, and look at it on a deeper level than just, oh, here's a cute story. The Bible's made for us to apply. It's made for us to transform our lives with. And it's not just a Sunday school story, as a lot of times we kind of maybe make the Bible out to be. So verse 22. Immediately, and I don't think it's... he uses this word here. It's not as much as he uses it in the book of Mark, but you do find it in this section a few times. Mm-hmm. He uses this word immediately. I don't know if there's an emphasis Matthew is making on something specifically, but he just fed the 5,000, and then now we move on to something else. I think immediately maybe is more of a transitionary kind of term here a little bit.
I think it's connecting the two.
Okay.
Because we see, we're going to see some timing. So here in verse 22, he talks about he dismissed the crowds.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of the feeding of 5,000, there were great crowds. And then verse 19, he orders the crowds. Mm-hmm. But then we're also going to see, as we continue on this story, it's going to talk about the fourth watch of the night.
Yeah.
And so it shows the timing where Jesus went down and fed all the crowds at evening time, at the end of the day. And so I think it's just a connecting...
Showing us the time frame when it all took place.
While some of our stories in Matthew, we take some big time leaps. I think this one is pretty tight
It's
together.
kind of, here we have a list of what's going on in chronological order. Right. It also stood out to me, maybe this is what you're about to bring up, but right in verse 13, he wanted to go off to a secluded place to pray, but he couldn't because he felt compassion for the crowds. And now, again, he's going off to a secluded place. He's getting back to what he planned on doing. Sometimes our plans get interrupted, and we have to remind ourselves of that. I know, at least I do. I'm a big planner. I like to have everything planned out. We were joking about this on Sunday. When we plan the maximum efficient way of handling a situation, and there's a curveball in there, it throws everything off. Sometimes our plans go awry.
But look at what Jesus allowed his plans to be derailed for.
Yeah, people.
Exactly. He had a truly servant attitude. It wasn't a me-first mentality. He saw the crowds in need, had compassion on them, and said, you know what, my self-care, if you will, my time of devotion can be temporarily paused. He didn't cancel it altogether. No. It's just a temporary pause because he circles back to it.
There was an immediate need, and he met that need.
Yeah.
So immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. So the disciples get in a boat and they start sailing across Galilee. He sends the crowds to another way, and he goes up onto a mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. So he finds a secluded place to pray, a place to reconnect with his heavenly Father, and there he's spending time in this devotional moment. And I don't want to gloss over that either, because I think we need to, at least I could do a better job of this right here.
Yeah.
I study a lot for class prep. I plan church events, work on lessons, pray with other people during their needs, but I could always do better when it comes to my own personal relationship with God. Jesus, our Lord, took time to go away to himself and pray.
It was deliberate. He didn't just pray when it was convenient for him. He didn't just pray in the shower and the drive on his way to work. I mean, he didn't drive to work, but he went out of his way to go to a certain place so that he could pray, devote himself to prayer.
And this isn't the only occasion we have of this, too.
Right. This is where he draws his strength from.
There you go, yeah.
He goes up to the mountain to draw strength. He's just done an incredible miracle. However it was done, he's fed 5,000 men, as it tells us, and this is what he chooses to do. Not, hey, look at me, I'm awesome, but he goes away because he knows he has to recharge so that he can be ready for the next thing that's about to take place.
Yeah. And he, like you said, this is his recharge. It's his time to kind of rejuvenate here a little bit. And I think we need more of that. Jesus has the assumption that we're going to do this. And even in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, when you go into your inner room to pray,
when you pray.
Yeah, he just assumes you're going to be going into a place and having a scheduled place or a time and a location. Sure. I know in my own life, there's been many occasions where, not when it's this hot outside, but I'll maybe go out in the backyard at night. We had a trampoline until last week. And I'll lay out on the trampoline and look up at the stars and talk to God. And I think there's something there about seeing God's creation, maybe the outdoors and all of that, being alone and praying. And he did that here, and I think it's just such a great example for us. Everything in Jesus' life is a good example for us, and here you have an example of personal prayer.
Who doesn't need to pray more?
Yeah.
I mean, all of us, especially the world we live in, there was distractions in their world too, but in our world, there's even more distractions than we even know. There's television, there's YouTube, there's all sorts of different social media sites and things that allow us to get distracted and focused on something else, which is we're going to come to in the next section here, that draw us away from where we really need to be. So I think Jesus, in and of itself, is showing us an example. Well, once he did something good, he did a work of God, he went to pray. What he prayed about, we don't know, but I presume this is where, Jesus understood that, Jesus is human. This shows his humanity too. Yeah. That he isn't just this, overflowing with power, but he has to rely on the Father to give him that strength.
And I don't want to overdo or looking at this, but I'm with you on it because I do the same thing. I find myself like on a Sunday afternoon, after I've taught and preached and engaged with all the people, that's when I want to go for a run.
Yeah.
Or even a walk or something. I'll disconnect and go.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I head out into these orchards out this way and walk out toward the highway here, and that's when I disconnect and reconnect, maybe spiritually, think about things, meditate on the day, pray, and it's I can see what Jesus is doing here. He just interacted with at least 5,000 men, not counting women and children and all that. I'd want to unwind too, and unwinding in prayer is a time to re-strengthen yourself. So I don't know, I just see a personal connection there. Sure. As one who deals with people like that, I could see wanting to do that. Well, let's keep going. So he sent the crowds away. He goes away alone to pray on the mountain. So the boat is in the water, and Jesus is on the hilltop or on the land. The crowd is away. Verse 24, though, we find out, but the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now, I know we hear, well, they're on a lake, a Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee historically could have a lot of storms. It's a very big lake. We're not just talking about, Lake Kauai. I don't know the exact dimensions. Yeah, it's big. And they get winds that come down, I believe, through like the Jordan Valley that way. And it can be, especially when you had the boats they had back then. Yeah. Obviously, it could be kind of sketchy. So the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. Now, Curtis, you mentioned a time for us. So fourth watch, what would that be?
Between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So the watches were broken up into 3 hours.
Okay.
And so the night, I believe, started at 6 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. And so you have a 12-hour period broken up into 4. That's 3 hours each.
So this is early hours of the morning before the sun comes up.
Yeah. And so if this is chronological, Jesus was alone from evening time till now. So he could have napped, but it's reasonably likely to assume that he stayed up all night in prayer.
Oh, wow, yeah. I never thought about that, but yes. So he comes to them, and he's walking on the sea. So here's that miracle. He's walking atop the surface of the water. You can't do that. I've seen it on Mythbusters. The only way they were able to do it was when they added a bunch of cornstarch, I thought, to the water, and then they did it. But that's not what's in the Sea of Galilee, okay? So you can't do this. I remember being a kid, we would try to see how many steps across a pool we could do running as fast as we can. You only got one. You can never do any more than that. So Jesus is walking along the sea, and the disciples saw him walking on the sea, and they were terrified. Because first off, it's dark outside.
Yeah.
It's late. It's early morning. It's spooky already. And they see a figure walking toward them on the water. And they cried out in fear, "It is a ghost." So Nick, are ghosts real?
I don't know. But let's pause on that for a minute because this phrase,
He dodged that
I
one.
dodged that one. I'm not. No. We're talking. No. Okay. So to formally dodge that. Okay. Pay attention to this little phrase.
Is there an informal dodging?
I don't know. Okay. When the disciples saw, there's other phrases used right with this word "edon," which is the Greek word. Back in chapter 12 and verse 2, when the Pharisees saw. Back in chapter 9, verse 11, when the Pharisees saw, when the disciples saw something. This indicates a almost always indicates a response
Okay.
from people. So
So it's
what
not just
they're
a casual
seeing,
glance, it is a
this
reaction.
They see something that causes them to act.
Mhm.
You know, so obviously their response here, they see Jesus walking on the sea.
Yeah.
What would you do if you saw somebody walking on water?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, not only that, but we're not talking about, you know, walking across a glass flat lake either. We're
Yeah.
talking about large waves, probably.
So they're already nervous.
Yes.
They're already afraid. It's dark outside, and you got superstitions of the sea and all sorts of things like that. And now you see a figure coming towards you in the dark. Yeah, I'd scream too.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just like any human would. You know, and then it says they were terrified. Now, this word's used 4 times here
Okay.
to talk about this idea of phobos, this fear.
Yeah.
Curtis might have a little more in depth on what that is, but there's a contrast here between fear and trust, which we're going to get to probably in just a minute. And I just think it's interesting how in their terror
Yeah.
they say it's a ghost. Well, what's everybody else been saying about Jesus? Well, he's John the Baptist. Well, he's Beelzebub. Well, he's this, he's that. And here they see this miraculous thing and they go, "Oh, it's a ghost."
I don't know if I don't think they
And-
understood it was him at first.
No,
But
I don't think they did
Yeah.
either. And
maybe that wouldn't be your assumption too, that Jesus is walking toward me.
well,
You know, you would think that, I don't know. I mean, as a human being, when we're afraid, we say and do some dumb things. My wife and I like to, when someone goes downstairs to get something late at night, like to hide at the bottom of the stairs. So when they walk around the corner, we startle each other.
Yeah.
We have a weird relationship. And we make the goofiest and weirdest noises and reactions when someone scares you
Right.
at nighttime, right?
Right.
It's a, "Ah, what do you think? No one's
Right.
going to kill you. I know no one's in my house attacking me. I know it's not a ghost, but you know what? It's spooky." So
Right.
they said it's a ghost. I don't think it's a theological statement about.
No.
but-
That's not what I was saying. I was
Well, I
just
know
saying
you wanted
it's a case of mistaken
Oh, mistaken
identity,
identity.
like most Jews have been doing in this book. you
Okay,
know.
so they don't get who he is.
They've
yet
seen
either.
Jesus do miracles before,
Yeah.
right? So why not this reaction at something else? Why not this reaction, you know, when he healed people? Why not this reaction when he, did other things? Here we have a response. So why this response? Why this? Why say that thing? Why think that in particular?
I just think they didn't know it was Jesus, and that was the first thing they came up with.
Could be.
Um,
Could be.
So they said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. Now, I jokingly mentioned, does this mean there's ghosts? I don't know anything about ghosts. We have spirits in the Bible mentioned. We have some raising from the dead after Jesus' crucifixion. I don't think this is any kind of theological point that we can make here beyond they were afraid and they said something crazy.
Yeah, I mean, about the only example of a ghost was what Saul with Samuel.
Yeah.
Um,
And you had that one with the witch of Endor and all that, yeah. But you do have spirits being visible after his crucifixion. But again, I don't think don't ever base any theology on the scared reaction of people late at night, early morning.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that was just a way to break the ice on our
Sure.
conversation today, asking you about ghosts. So they were freaked out about what they saw. And immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." So don't freak out. Calm down. It's me.
So I'm going to jump in here a little bit. I think that, again, I'm not as well learned as you gentlemen are, but the English translation does a major disservice to this verse right here.
Okay.
When it says, "Take heart, it is I," that Greek word is ego ami, which is I am. And so if it, and especially in John's gospel, there's emphasis on I am. And when you hear, "Take heart, I am," what would you think of? Go back to the burning bush, right? How does God describe himself? He describes himself as I am. And here Jesus is saying that, "Take heart, I am. Do not be afraid." And I think that's something that we miss in just looking at the English language here, that the Matthew's readers would catch on and grasp that Jesus is essentially saying that, take courage, God is here. There's no reason to be afraid. He's essentially, in my opinion, calling himself God, identifying as God here.
Yeah, he could be. I never thought of that before in this instance. I know for sure in John, that phrase "I am" is used, throughout it to prove Jesus' messiahship. So Jesus then would be saying, "Take courage. I am He is the one. I'm the one.
Yeah.
Do not be afraid." So now we have these other terms here. So have courage. Don't be afraid. And I think these two phrases now set the stage for the rest of this section. In times of fear, when we're stressed out, when we're worried, trust in Jesus, take courage, don't be afraid. Now, Peter makes this statement here, and I'll open it up here to you guys, see if you have an opinion on this, but he says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Now, do you think he's testing the situation, or does he just want to experience how amazing Jesus is right here?
I think both. I think that he is truly seeing if it is Jesus, and I think it's no coincidence that he calls Jesus Lord in this instance as well. And he's asking to be commanded. So one is that, are you truly Jesus? Are you truly my Lord? And then if you are, command me to do this, which shows a tremendous amount of faith.
Tremendous amount of faith that Jesus could empower him to come out there in some way.
Well, and the fact that Peter trusts him.
Yeah.
You know, already he says, look, I know what my Lord can do. So if you're my Lord, command me to do this. And he walks out on the water.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of, we sung the song at the Youth Devo last night, or on Sunday night, I believe it's the Ocean song, wasn't it? It quotes this section right here a little bit.
You call me out upon the water.
Yeah. So here you have Peter asking, Lord, call me out upon the water. Give me this opportunity. And Jesus says, come. And Peter gets out of the boat and walks on the water and came toward Jesus. So not only is Jesus able to do this supernatural thing, he's able to empower Peter in some way or create some kind of, defy the laws of physics and allow Peter to walk on the water. Peter experiences this ability, and you can imagine this connection. He's walking toward Jesus across the water, and then something happens. He wavers for a second in verse 30. It says, but seeing the wind, he became frightened. So there's our frightening idea again. So they were afraid before. Jesus told him, don't be afraid. He sees the wind and became frightened, and he began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. So he took his eyes off Jesus for a moment. He got distracted by the storms around him and the wind, and he started to sink. But I love what he does. See, we always get mad at Peter's faith right here. We always go, oh, Peter took his eyes off Jesus. Peter's a bad guy. He's flaky. He's the only one that got out on the water. No one else did.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. Not only is his response to Jesus or the ghost show a lot of faith, that Lord command me, but then to step out of the boat when the winds and the waves are raging, because that is still happening here.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of faith that Jesus just jumps out of the boat and has his eyes on Jesus.
Peter jumps out of the boat. Yes.
It has his eyes on Jesus, focused on Jesus, but it's not until he sees the wind, he takes his eyes off Jesus, that he then becomes fearful.
So initially, we have a huge statement of faith by Peter.
Yeah.
This is awesome. He has enough faith. The rest of the disciples stayed in the boat. I'd be saying, Jesus, come on, get in. Peter says, I'm going to go out to you. Yeah. That's so many illustrations for a sermon right there, by the way. I'm just like, that's awesome right there.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. If you're going to make a bold move, make sure it's towards Jesus.
Ooh, yeah, if you're going to make a bold move, make sure it's toward Jesus. He gets out as willing to walk across the water to get to his work. I'm not willing to interrupt my schedule. I'm not willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit. Peter was willing to walk across water for Jesus. That's pretty amazing.
This is all kind of a chain reaction, though, too, because he sees the wind. Now, again, we've got to kind of look at the scene we're in, because we would be the same way, right? If this all happens, we see nature taking its course upon the world, which could potentially have a threat upon our life. We're going to do the same thing that Peter does. Peter sees the wind, and he was afraid.
Yeah,
He feared, right? And began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me.
Yeah.
I think of this as just like, I couldn't have done any better than Peter did,
I couldn't do what Peter did.
I wouldn't have got out of the boat.
I don't think I couldn't have done it.
And when he's sinking, he doesn't say, quick, throw me a life preserver. He says, Lord, save me.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that says a lot too. So even when he did take his eyes off Jesus for a moment and started to sink, he knew the source of salvation was still Jesus. And we get off track and we cling to other things. He clinged to Jesus.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to run on that tangent a little bit, because we see him call in Lord, verse 28, and then again in verse 30, Lord. Lord, save me. And if we remember what Jesus, the word Jesus, the name Jesus means, it means the Lord is salvation. And so he's calling out, Lord, save me. And then the next word is Jesus. The next word is the Lord is salvation. I think it's no coincidence that he is calling on the Lord. And we need to remember that the Lord is salvation, Jesus.
Right. So, to summarize what you said then, so Peter says, Lord, save me. And then Matthew says immediately, salvation came, right? In a way with the name Jesus.
You could have just said Jesus, Jesus.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because the name Jesus, is the Lord of salvation. So he says, the Lord save me, Lord. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him. And I don't know, in my mind, I picture him rising up out of the water or something like that. You know what I mean?
He starts slowly going down. Then Jesus gets there and he goes right back up.
Right? And he said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Like, why'd you doubt? Why'd you take your eyes off me for a second? Why'd you waver for one moment? Don't doubt. And when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. So now the storm dies down.
Yeah.
So the wind stopped when they get into the boat, and those who were in the boat worshipped him. So now they chime in. They could have gone out in the water, but they worshipped him, saying, you are certainly God's son. So those people in the boat realized who he was. They acknowledged him as the Son of God. And when you realize who Jesus is, the proper response is to worship him.
Yeah. It's interesting, the contrast that Matthew has, because this isn't the first time we've seen Jesus calm a storm.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to Matthew chapter 8, and it's very similar, and even the Jesus asked the same question in that instance. He asked, oh, you of little faith, why are you afraid? But I want to look at the reaction of the disciples, the difference here. In Matthew chapter 8, the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the seas obey him? Here, after the wind ceased, verse 33, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God.
Marvel versus worship.
Well, no, it went from you're an amazing man to you are
The
the Son of God.
Right.
Which that transition of being around Jesus took them to that point.
Yeah. So we see a maturation process. Throughout the parables, what was a question that Jesus asked the disciples? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you understand? The same thing with, they have such little faith here, but Jesus gave them so much to have a great amount of faith. But here you see that while they still waver at times, they still acknowledge, they get the fact that Jesus is the Son of God.
And now the evidence is there and they respond appropriately.
Yeah. So the question that I would ask is that, do we recognize Jesus, one, when he's walking across the water, but do we recognize Jesus as Jesus who truly is, which is the Son of God?
Yeah.
What
do we
do?
Oh,
What's his power?
Yeah.
What power does he have to, we're not going to get out of this life alive. This is just a fact. So what do we do? If we're not going to get out of here alive, who do we cling to? Who do we look for?
We better cling to the one that'll help us when we're drowning.
That's right.
And so I mean, either we willing to follow him when he's walking on the water, or at least cry out to him when we're sinking. Either way, we need to acknowledge him as Lord. So what are some lessons from this miracle that we can take, or from this situation here, and apply to us? I mean, number one, we need to trust in Jesus. Number two, acknowledge him as the Son of God. What else stands out to you guys?
Fear plays a big factor in how we trust.
Yeah, it can affect our trust negatively.
Yeah, I mean, it can. What does fear cause us to do when faith is required? Here, Peter's trust in Jesus is required, and he let the distractions keep him from continuing to walk toward Jesus. It's evidently a reminder of how some of us start out, about how we all start out. We're baptized, we get up, we're on fire, we're focused, and then we get distracted.
Yeah, we get distracted.
We start to sink, and before we know it, we're like, where did this all go? And so I'm not reading into it, but I think that's a valuable lesson too, that we have to understand that if we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we will know the way to go.
Yeah. And a lesson to me here is I've always seen people bash Peter in this. Be like Peter.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
He got out of the
Like
boat.
Peter.
Yeah, he got out of the boat. And in times of struggle, when he got off track, he still cried out to Jesus.
Yeah, and
And
that's,
that's
huge.
huge.
And I think that we hit it again in chapter 6 and chapter 8, this concept of anxiety, that we need to be calling on Jesus when we are fearful. But Jesus is there with Peter, but the winds and the waves are still
there.
Jesus is
Yeah.
with them, and he didn't automatically eliminate the wind.
No.
And that's what this concept, this "Oh, you of little faith." If you go all the way back to chapter 6, verse 30, he's talking about, "But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is today is alive and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, 'What shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear?'" And then he finishes up in verse 33. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
It's about trust.
It's keeping your eyes, as Nick was saying, on Jesus and focus on Jesus.
Well, there's plenty of passages in the New Testament that talk about fixing your eyes on
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah.
You know, Hebrews 12:2, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. The idea that, you know, if we want to be where Jesus is, we have to focus on Jesus because He's the leader.
So my lessons to our audience from this would be, if you're in a situation where you're terrified, they were. If you're in a situation where you're fearful, if you're in a situation where you're beginning to sink, if you're in a situation of doubt, turn to looking to Jesus, and He will pick you up, and you will truly see Him being the Son of God, and you'll have that blessing there. And for all of us, we need to turn to Him in those difficult times. And a lot of people are in difficult times right now. I mean,
Yeah.
our normalcy that we normally have, all that's gone. There's people going through difficult times. There always is people going through difficult times. But the lesson is still the same. Look to Jesus to save you and to pull you out of those storms. And He'll calm them. We just got to look to Him.
So what's the significance in verse 33 that the disciples worshipped Him?
Well, it's the word we normally use from worship, right? The proskuneo word, which is to bow down or to kiss toward. And that idea, I don't know what you're asking for significant-wise, but they do acknowledge Him now as someone greater. It's not just, oh, wow, you're special. It's now you're an object worthy of, or a being worthy of worship.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
No, I was saying, is this the first time the disciples worship Jesus in this way?
I don't
Or is there
know.
another incident? I can't think of off the top of my head another incidents
in
where.
Matthew 28 He's worshipped.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm
I'm
saying.
saying, but early
the first
on
time
here.
in the book, in
And
the story,
I
that
think
he's.
there's one other time.
Is there one other one before this?
Yeah,
Or
because if you go back to the temptations of Christ, Satan says, "If you bow down and worship me," and Jesus comes back and says that we only worship God.
right.
Well, I mean,
I think there's one
well,
other time.
yeah.
you make a logical conclusion there. If you only worship God, Jesus allowed Himself to be worshipped. Either He's sinning or He's God.
Yeah.
That's a huge, I mean,
Which goes back to verse 27, the I am, and then truly you are the Son of God. I
Yeah.
think Matthew is ramping up that.
it is. It's this incremental faith of the disciples, incremental testimony concerning Jesus, all of that. It does. It builds, it builds.
I think it is.
But yeah, I think you might be right here on it being the first
Yeah.
one we have, and I
this is
haven't
the
never
first
looked
time
into that
they've
much.
actually recognized, and that's why it's going to go when we go into chapter 15 and chapter 16, or especially chapter 16, when they ask, when Jesus asks them, "Who do men say that I am?" They give them all these answers, and then they ask them, "But who do you say that I am?"
You do have, and I got to look at the term. So you do have occasions where people bow down before Him.
Sure,
Yeah.
right.
And sometimes it's the same word.
Well, I'm talking about the disciples.
Yeah,
the
disciples do it.
themselves, the people that are following them.
Yeah.
The other people, like we have, I think it was the centurion bowed down before him. There was another man.
Yeah,
just,
there's a
just
synagogue
recently,
official and all that.
another miracle that we read of where someone knelt down. I can't think of what it is or where it is. That knelt down before him, and with this idea that they recognized his power and who he was. But this is the first time I think we see the idea.
Well, in
of,
reverent awe,
right.
proclaiming His lordship as the Son of God is a act of worship.
And Jesus is worthy of worship.
Absolutely.
Right.
And when Jesus saves us from the storm is when our reaction needs to be one of worship. Because,
absolutely.
when we are in moments of fear or anxiety, do we wait until we're sinking like Peter to call out? And then once we are pulled up out of the water, what is our reaction? Do we go about our normal business, or do we bow down and worship?
Can you imagine that conversation between Peter and Jesus after this?
Yeah, what just happened? just hold on here. Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know how much he explains after that, but yeah, it would have been amazing.
There's not much explanation, but I mean,
Yeah.
we definitely see, you know, as soon as the wind ceases, these disciples are like, man.
Well,
this
when
is
you
the guy we've been looking
recognize,
for, you know?
when you experience the greatness and salvation of Jesus, you have to worship him following that. And that's what they did. Well, let's keep going here then. Verse 34. When they had crossed over, so now they finally get to the other side of the sea, they came to the land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. And they implored him that they might touch the fringe of his cloak, and as many as touched it were cured. So now he goes to the other side of the lake, and a lot of people recognize, I mean, Jesus is recognizable now. He's been spending all this time up in the northern region of Palestine, around Galilee. Miracle after miracle. We have the miracle of the demoniac. We have the miracles of healing the whole bunch of different people. And now you have a bunch of people recognizing him, and the word spreads. And what did the people do? They brought him their sick, and they had such faith that they said, let us touch the fringe of your garment.
Yeah.
And those people that touched it were cured. Now, in typical Matthew fashion, this is kind of just one of those big healing sections where just kind of is left there for us. We don't have a lot of details with it. But I love the idea of as many as touched it were cured. Jesus has enough power and blessing for all.
This is just like the woman who touched the fringe of Jesus' garment. And don't you think that's interesting that it's not people saying, you know, Jesus touched me. It's them going to him saying, oh, if I just touch the fringe of his garment, I can be healed.
If I could just experience a little bit of Jesus.
It's like they knew about that experience with that woman, and they said, you know what, that's all we need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I didn't look. It'd be something that we can look for and discuss on Wednesday night. But with the woman who was cured, that comment "made well" was the same word as "save," and so it'd be interesting to see if that is the case here.
Cured there.
Yeah, because and as many as touched it were saved. It'd be interesting to see that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift gears briefly and look back again at the contrast to Matthew chapter 8. In Matthew chapter 8, the disciples' reaction was, what kind of man is this? But then we immediately get the story of the fact that the demons recognize Jesus as the Son of God. And here we see that the disciples recognize Jesus as the Son of God. And then immediately after, we get another group of people who recognize Jesus. But this time it's men that recognize him. So we're again ratcheting up on who Jesus is.
And it all shows him, it's pointing toward, even that statement with the centurion on the cross, that truly you are the Son of God, it's pointing us toward that kind of situation there. But I love that you have people, we don't know the levels of their faith, where they're at in their belief, but they knew enough about Jesus that if I come to him and he lets me touch his coat, I'm going to be healed, and he had enough power that he did it. Just in case you thought that his blessings were just for the disciples, here you have him curing the multitudes. There's enough blessings from Jesus for the multitudes even today to find cures for all that ails them.
Yeah, to go back to feeding 5,000, there's enough for everyone to eat to their fill, and there's plenty left over.
Everyone can be satisfied with Jesus. Well, we'll stop there tonight, and we'll get into a weighty discussion next week in chapter 15, but so much practical application for us. I recommend you read back over this and see how this speaks to you and applies to you, because this is so powerful, the faith of Peter and the reaction of the disciples and what Jesus did here in the end of Matthew chapter 14. You guys have anything else you want to add as we close tonight? Well, I thank you for tuning in and participating in this study. Please, if you don't know how to get into the Zoom class, message one of us and we'll get you the login information. Try to stay connected the best way you can. Even though things are different, there's a lot of good going on. I don't want us to just sit around with a woe is me kind of attitude, because we're engaging in a Bible study here. People are fellowshipping, even if it's virtually. I mean, every day in the office I'm seeing a stack of cards that people are writing to members. People are getting their needs met, and the Word of God is still being spread even through a different time right now. But again, thanks for tuning in. Have a good evening.